Next, from Elmhurst College, Senate President John Cullerton reviews the challenges facing the state and what policy options he says are available to lawmakers and the governor as they try to fix the unfunded pension systems and catch up on past due bills. This runs about 1 hour and 10 minutes.
Thank you very much for that very nice introduction. I'm really happy to be here. I've been looking forward to this because this is, if I have it right, DuPage County. And I grew up in DuPage County. I grew up in Winfield, Illinois, went to St. Francis High School, and have been here before, but not recently and not under these circumstances. So I hope that you find what I want to say to be a little bit interesting. I got to tell you that the real reason why I'm here, though, is I have to tell you because when Lee Daniels asks you to come, you have to fulfill that request. And Lee's a good friend who served as the speaker, and I have great respect for his knowledge of state government and for what he continues to do in showing interest in state government. I'm also happy to see that some of my colleagues are here as well. So I got to tell you that this presentation is definitely influenced by my wife. My wife tells me you got to do PowerPoint, you got to do pie charts, you got to keep people awake because otherwise you're too boring. So, by the way, I am the President of the Senate, but my wife is the Speaker of my House. So I kind of go along with. I've learned that out of 33 years. Just do what she tells you, and it makes it a lot easier. So, if we could, I'll just talk to you about what I want to talk about. Okay? So, in order to talk about the pension problem, you have to sort of know what the state budget does. And very few people in the Chicago media market know what the state budget is all about. It's 200 miles away in Springfield, and there's much more stuff to talk about than explaining what we do in Springfield. And so when things are bad in Springfield and people don't know what we do, it makes it harder to fix it because people say, well, just get rid of all the, the waste and corruption, but they don't know what we spend our money on. So what we spend our money on is important. There's two particular issues that I want to go into more detail. That's Medicaid and, of course, our pensions. Want to brag a little bit about what we did do in terms of cutting the budget last year, but at the same time, consider the ramifications of those cuts, and then explain to you what the proposal for the pension reform is, and I can assure you that it will not pass unless we have bipartisan support. So, that first pie chart that my wife made me put up here, this is where we get the money and how much we get. Okay? Now, this is what's called the general revenue funds. I'll talk in a little bit second about the other funds. But this is the general revenue funds. And you see that most of the money comes from the individual income tax, which is at 5%, and it's a flat tax. You see that the corporate income tax only brings in 6.3% of our total budget. So it actually doesn't bring in that much money. It's controversial to have a corporate income tax, but we do get some money. About 2/3 of corporations don't pay any tax in Illinois, and that's the money we bring in. The sales tax, you see, that's the second largest source of revenue. The thing that's noteworthy about the sales tax is that unlike other states, our sales tax covers goods, whereas in many other states, the sales tax covers goods and some services. So, for example, if you get your oil change in your car, you pay a sales tax on the oil. You don't pay a sales tax on the service to put it in Illinois, but other states they do. You see these other taxes and fees. Those are things like the cigarette tax and the money we get from gaming, and there's taxes on oil and heating. There's taxes on your phones and that sort of thing. And then the federal receipts, that's the money we get to pay for our Medicaid program. So that's where the money comes from. And the next chart, and I'll go through this slowly because we put them in different pieces of the pie. This is actually where we spend the money. Okay? So if you look, the first thing I think that people are surprised by is if you ask somebody what percentage of state government's money goes to pay for the state government, most people would think, well, a lot, right? But actually, it's not that much at all. So if you look up in the upper top corner there, the government services, 3.5%. That's like, you know, paying for the people that work for the state, the Secretary of State's office and the like. When you add in the prison system, that's public safety and regulation, that prison system, and the state police, that's only 4.8%. And then when you add in the other state employees that affect the other parts of the puzzle, it's really only about 11% of all our money goes to pay for the operation of state government. The next chart down is of particular importance, I think, to Lee Daniels, for example, because that's human services, 15% of our budget. This is, these are not state employees that provide these services. These are not-for-profits who provide services primarily for seniors or disabled kids, and we contract with those not-for-profits. Typically, they're not union organizations, they're not-for-profits, there's not a lot of extra money that goes in there every year. In fact, we've had to cut those. For example, the Haymarket services over on the west side of Chicago for people who are addicts, they would get money from that budget. Misericordia, you've heard of Misericordia facility for disabled kids, they would get money from that. That's 15%. The next one down is P through 12, so that's education. That's our schools. That's our grammar schools and high schools. That is just short of 20% of our general funds budget. And look at higher ed. Higher ed is pretty small. So that's our University of Illinois, Northern, Southern, right? That's only less than 6%. That's been declining as a percentage of this budget, and as a result, tuitions have been going up. Okay? I think it's also true that out of that budget is where the MAP grants are funded. So the MAP grants would be of particular interest to even private colleges here. The biggest one is Medicaid and health care, 23.3%. That's something which I'll talk about in greater detail. That's obviously the biggest piece of the pie. Now, we're also going to talk about pensions. Pensions right now are up to 15%, over 15% of our budget. But even that next chart up there, the next pie, I mean, is debt service on pension bonds. That's 4.6. That actually is paying off some borrowing that we did to pay the pension obligation for a few years back. And that debt will go away in about 3 or 4 years, but that's how much we had to pay this year. The actual debt service on capital bonds, that's kind of like, you know, you buy something that lasts a long time, you pay it off by borrowing bonds, you pay that off. That's a relatively small part. The next one requires a little explanation. It's called statutory transfers out. What that really is grants to other entities. The biggest one is local governments. So local governments, that is cities and counties, get per capita, it's not a complicated formula, per person, you get over $1 billion. And that comes directly from the state to the local governments. And of course they use that for police and fire and other services that counties and cities provide. And so that's the total of where we spend our general revenue funds, okay? Now, it's true that we have other funds, so we should just look at that. The general funds you see on the right, this $33,719,000,000, that's what we had this last year. Other state funds, there's a whole bunch of other little checking accounts, if you will, and those come from specific fees. So there could be a fee on insurance companies, and that goes into the insurance company fund, and then that would be used to pay for portions of state government. And every once in a while we've gone into those other state funds and we've kind of either taken some of the extra money to use in the general revenue fund or borrowed from it. So but that's a big portion. I don't think any other state has as many special funds as we do. And the federal funds, you see there, that's money that would typically come, most of that would go to education. So the federal government pays a certain percentage of our education money, that goes into that pie there, okay? So just wanted to show you that it's not just this general revenue fund, but that's the one we normally talk about. So here's how the budget making process works. First we start off with how much money are we going to have for the coming year. Remember, we do this based on guesstimates as to how much money we're going to have come in and guesstimates about how much things are going to cost. So it's a budget. We do this before the fiscal year starts on July 1st. So first we start off with how much money are we going to have. Then we have these things we would call off-the-top expenditures. We're going to go back to this pie, and I'll tell you the things that we do. We call them non-discretionary. We got to spend the money on them, and we will pay those off first. And then we determine how much money we've got left, and then we do the discretionary items. Not that the discretionary are not important, it's just that we are prioritizing things, and you'll see that this year when we got to those non-discretionary, or to the discretionary part, we had to actually cut. So, go back to that pie. Everything on the left here, you see, are things that we consider non-discretionary. So we have to pay for Medicaid. It's an entitlement program. It's driven by a formula. You owe the money. You got to pay it. Pensions, you can't skip a pension payment. Some states have done it. We think it's a really bad idea. And when we talk about the pensions in more detail, I'll explain why. Obviously, we have to pay debt service. You can't default on your bonds. And there's some people that have said, why don't you keep that money and not give it to local government, that $1 billion. That would be very controversial. You could do that. You have to pass a law to do that. But right now, we figure we owe that money. Okay? So everything on the left there is what we would call non-discretionary. Everything to the right is discretionary. So after we took our budget, we said we got $33,719,000,000. We've got to pay the stuff off the top on the left. So now we've got $16,439,000,000 to pay for the discretionary spending. And here's where I want you to look at the non-discretionary expenditures, and I'll just point out a couple highlights. The reason why this off-the-top money went up, the biggest reason is that top number, $958 million. That was the increase in the pensions. So we had, before we started, we had almost $1 billion that we had to pay. I think the difference in actual revenue, increased by about, $500 million from the previous year. But the first thing we had to do was pay almost $1 billion in pensions. We then cut $264 million. That's that group insurance. That was a vote that we had to take. It wasn't easy, but we told retired state employees, your health insurance deal is not going to be so great, and we're going to save $250 million by doing that. And then we decided we needed to pay old bills, because we had fallen behind in paying our bills because of the 2 years of huge recession, two years of a recession that resulted in us getting behind. And paying old bills is really just paying your vendors a little quicker. And we put aside $1 billion to do that. So that just shows you how tough the non-discretionary expenditure deal is. So then we got to the discretionary. And it turned out, in order to balance our budget, we had to cut $651 million from the previous year. So this is not a cut in growth. This is like they do in Washington. This is a real cut in actual dollars. And these 5 categories are kind of like, what most people think about what the state does, right? So human services, I talked about Haymarket on the west side of Chicago. Lee Daniels is very involved in that group. We had to cut them by $2 million from the previous year. And that's $2 million out of that $200 million. Other folks who receive human services, these are real basic services, kids who are disabled, seniors. These are really important programs. They're efficiently run. They're not bureaucratic state employees. These are run by not-for-profits, and we had to cut them. How about education? Nobody wants to cut education. When people say, fix the mess in Springfield, okay, we'll cut education. No, I didn't mean that. Don't cut education. So, but we did. We cut from the previous year, and I'll show you in more detail how this has happened, the trend. We cut $209 million in the school aid formula. Now, the school aid formula is complicated. It gives more money to poorer areas. So if you're in a wealthier area and you got high property taxes, you don't lose as much. But there's a general obligation, I think, for people statewide to educate our high school, grammar school kids. And we obviously have a formula that could be altered. It's controversial sometimes, but nobody likes to cut anything from education, but we did. Higher education, here you go. Here's your MAP grants that benefits this college. We had to cut it by $17 million. $17 million in MAP grants from the previous year. Instead of increasing it, as people would like to do, we had to cut it. Public safety, that's the prisons and the state police, and general services, like the rest of state government. Okay? So those were the cuts. You can, if you're somebody who is saying government spends too much money and we got to cut and balance our budget, that's what we did. If you're one of the recipients of that money, you say you cut too much. So the major issues then for this year that confronted us were, how can we keep up with the demands of our K through 12 funding, but how at the same time are we going to pay our old bills? We're going to have to do something about Medicaid reform, because that cost is escalating at the highest rate of any cost, along with pensions. And what are we going to do about the pensions? So let's talk about education funding. We are here at a college. The first thing I want to do, because I always get this question at a town meeting, somebody says, maybe not the younger people, but people who are older, they say, I thought the lottery was supposed to pay for education, right? I see nods. So the lottery does pay for education. So I thought what we'd do is show you how much we spend on education in Illinois and how much the lottery provides, okay? So this is not exaggerated, but this is everything. This is the total funding, state, local, and federal dollars, including property taxes. That's how much money we spend on education. Education meaning public education, K through 12, and I think higher ed is included here too. So it's $36.3 billion, and the lottery brings in $600 million. So if the lottery didn't bring in $600 million, we'd have to come up with $600 million somewhere else, but you can see it doesn't pay for education. Okay, I just thought I'd throw that in. And now let's look at what's happened since 2005. Every year we would increase education funding, just really not by a lot, but kind of like the rate of inflation. And then you see what we've been doing since fiscal year 9. The last 3 years it's been cut, primarily because of the cost of pensions, which is why we want to talk about pension reform. But I just wanted to show you what happens at the state level when we try to balance a budget and the ramifications. One note on accounts payable. We had been accused of being the deadbeat state. It was true. We had really run up a bunch of bills. We owed a bunch of people some money. We're making great progress. So as of, it changes from day to day. So we picked August 31st. This was the end of our the lapse period where you had to pay your bills. According to the comptroller, $5.4 billion was how much we owed. But then back in 2010, the previous comptroller said that we owed over $9 billion. So now, as you guys know, I am a Democrat, and I know this is DuPage County. There's a lot of Republicans out here, so I'm not going to be too political. But I just thought that I would raise one, I would call it a political issue. During the presidential campaign, there's been this controversy raised by Mitt Romney's comment that was caught at his fundraiser about the entitlement issue. And a lot of people have said to me, he does have a point. And so I thought I would take that point that he raised and apply it to state government. Obviously, the federal government is a different government. We're at the state level. So if you look at the quote that Mr. Romney had, he was talking about the people who are dependent on government and whether they're victims and they feel like government has a responsibility for them and the like. So if we then go to the Medicaid benefits enrollment, you'll see why many people agree with Mr. Romney, and that is, this is who's eligible for Medicaid. Okay? So this is 3 million people in Illinois out of less than 13. And look how it's doubled since 2002. So this is a major concern to us. It's a major concern, and we want to do something about it, and we did do something about it, but you really have to drill down and see who these people are and how much money we're spending on them. And then make your own decision as to whether or not you think they're victims or they're people who feel that they're entitled, okay? Because it gets a little complicated. So let's take a look at who the enrollees are. So the red, there's almost 1.8 million of these folks. These are children, okay? So these are poor children, and this is health care. So we're saying poor kids under a certain level, poverty level, which we can adjust, are entitled to health care. It's an entitlement program. It's driven by a formula, and that's how many there are. The next one up are disabled adults. There's only 275,000. These would be people who are adults who could have a serious illness from birth. They live in a group home, cerebral palsy. They're in a group home. There's only 275,000 of them, but they're also in this group. The top one, jump up to the top one, that's yellow, 180,000. Those are seniors in nursing homes. Seniors in nursing homes. 2/3 of nursing homes in Illinois have Medicaid-eligible seniors. And my mother died last year. She was one of those that was in a nursing home and just about to be eligible for Medicaid. But many of these seniors are folks who maybe they had money, maybe their kids got all their money, who knows, but by the time that they're sick and needed being in a nursing home, they're eligible for Medicaid, and that's 180,000 of them, okay? Now, the green, those are other adults, so they're not disabled, they're not kids. Primarily, they're the mothers of the kids. And there's a little over 700,000 of them, and they're eligible for Medicaid. So that's the group of the 3 million that we're talking about, okay? Now, the next slide shows you how much they cost. And this is kind of interesting. So the kids on the left, that's 61% of the total. They only cost like 26% of the cost because primarily we're spending money on children for preventive medicine. So it's not as costly, and it's smart to do that because otherwise they'll be, you know, seriously expensive, and you'll spend more money in emergency rooms. So the idea there is to give them that preventive medicine, okay? If you look at the green, that's the other adults. They're about 22% of the population, 18% of the cost. Those are the mothers, primarily, who are the mothers of the children who are poor. Those are the poor people who are eligible for Medicaid. Look at the blue. Those are adults with disabilities. So you see that even though they're a small percentage, less than 10% of the total, they're very expensive to take care of, and not surprisingly. Okay? And the top, that's those seniors I was talking about. They're only 6% of the total, but they cost 18% of the cost. And so there's a lot of talk about reforming that because, again, seniors can take their money, give it to their kids, and then say they don't have any money, and then be eligible for Medicaid. So the kids could be real wealthy. So that's something which is a controversy. That's something we could talk about. Now, in spite of this makeup, in spite of where we spend the money, we knew we had to do something this year about Medicaid costs. And we had to do it because the previous year we appropriated a certain amount of money and the cost was $1.9 billion more. So it was kind of like a structural deficit that kept on rolling. So we said, the governor said in his budget, he said, we got to cut Medicaid. And by the way, this was also done in a bipartisan fashion with all 4 caucuses involved, and it wasn't easy, but we did it. And so what do we do? We went through all of these Medicaid programs, and we cut $1.13 billion. We changed eligibility. We changed usage. I mean, we said if you're entitled to free eyeglasses once a year, you got to wait 2 years or whatever. We went through the whole deal and cut eligibility, and in some cases, hopefully would provide services in a more efficient way. Then we said waste and fraud. Waste and fraud. People gaming the system, saying that they're eligible for Medicaid when they're really not, or providers double billing, that sort of thing. About 59,000 adults in Illinois quit. A similar amount don't die prematurely. We save millions of dollars in the Medicaid program because people are healthier right away when they don't smoke. And in spite of that, 18% of Illinoisans still smoke, even though we raised it, and we get to raise about $300 million. We take that $300 million, we match it with the federal Medicaid dollars. That makes it $600 million. We do a little assessment on the hospitals, and we come up with $700 million, or actually $800 million. So that was $800 million in savings to our Medicaid program, and even in spite of that, we still weren't finished to get to our balanced budget, so we told the hospitals we're going to have to cut how much money we pay you for services by 3%. That's what we did. That was a really tough bill, and we'll see as the year plays out whether or not we're going to actually save that money, whether we have to go back and do something more. Okay, so now we finally get to the pension costs. So rather than just start with pensions and have you understand why we have to do pensions, I thought I'd explain what the budget does and how this increase in pensions every year is crowding out the money what you need for basic services, okay? So it's rising pension costs mean less revenues for discretionary spending. So here's how much money we've been spending on pensions going back to 1996. Now remember I told you that there was a couple years in the heart of the recession where we actually borrowed the money for pensions. And it was a real smart thing to do. That's the green. So we went and borrowed that money and we put it into the pension system. If we didn't do that, remember when the stock market was like at 6,500? Now it's at 13,000. So all the monies that would have been that we made in our investments in the pension system would have been lost because we didn't borrow that money. And we borrowed the money at really low interest rates. So that's why we did it. Other states, as I said, have skipped it. I think it's very short-sighted. So, but look at how much money we've paid into the pension system, and look at what's happened in the last 5 years. Okay? This is an enormous amount of money. It's almost $6 billion. And that's why remember I told you last year it went up by $1 billion, and then we had to cut education and human services by $650 million. That alone could have been avoided if we didn't have to pay so much money for the pensions. So here's another way of looking at how much money we spent on pensions as a percentage of our total general revenues, okay? You see back in '06, it was just a little over 3% of our budget, and now it's over 15%. Just another way of looking at it. Okay, so what are these pension funds? There's 5 of them. 2 little ones, one for the judges, one for the General Assembly. You can barely see that JRS up there. The rest of them are basically, see the GARS is that real small little one there, and the JRS are the judges. So there's 3 big ones. SERS is state employees. SURS are university employees and community colleges. And the biggest one is the TRS, which is called the Teachers Retirement System. And it's really important for you to know that it doesn't cover Chicago. Chicago Teachers Pension System is a separate system, and the state this year has paid nothing into that system. But the state has an obligation to pay for the pension system for the suburban and downstate teachers, and it's over half the total. Okay, this next chart, don't be intimidated by it. I'll just quickly show you, it's really pretty simple how a pension system works. On the left, for these 5 systems, it shows you how much money they have in the bank. Those are their assets. The liabilities are how much money an actuarial study would tell you you need to pay out in pension benefits in the future. The difference is the unfunded liability. Another way of saying it is you need to have 100% funded. If you're 100% funded, if everybody retired the same day, everybody quit, all the teachers quit, all the state employees quit, the university employees, and they all retired the same day, you'd need to have 100%. So obviously that doesn't happen. So that's why you have less than 100. But that's that $83 billion that people keep on talking about that we owe. Now, we don't owe it today. We owe it over the next 30 years, okay? The funding ratio is the number that has down there 43.30. That's how much, that's a percentage of 100% that each fund has. And if it makes you feel any better, back in 1970, the funding ratio was even worse. So it's been a chronic problem primarily because the General Assembly, collectively, we're all guilty, have not funded the pension systems. That's the #1 reason. That, a little bit of the stock market, a little bit of, you know, get people living longer than we expected, but the primary cause has been the fact that we didn't put enough money in. And there's one benefit that's the most costly, and I'll get to that in a second, okay? Now, in solving this problem, we have a technical problem. It's called the Constitution of the State of Illinois, okay? It's a little problem. And if we didn't have this, it would be a lot easier. At least legally, it'd be a lot easier. Politically, it'd still be hard. But here's the deal. This is actually from the Constitution. And basically what it says is, if a pension system of the state is an enforceable contractual relationship and the benefits can't be reduced, okay? And this is patterned after New York Constitution. It was done in 1970 at the Constitutional Convention. The people at the Constitutional Convention knew exactly what they were doing. It was actually a lady from DuPage County named Kinney who was the chair of this, led the fight to make sure that there's money in these pension funds. You saw that in 1970 the pension system was more underfunded than it is now. They knew just what they were doing. They said, you gotta pay up. So, in order for us to solve this problem, we have to somehow get people to reduce their own pension system. They got to do it contractually. They got to do it voluntarily, but also contractually. So we want to kind of entice people who are employees and retirees to say, if you give up your most costly pension benefit, we'll give you something for it. It's kind of like a contract. There's got to be an offer, an acceptance, and there has to be consideration. That's what a contract is. And that is what we want to do. But first I want to show you what is the benefit that's so costly. The benefit that's so costly is called a compounded COLA. COLA is cost of living increase. If it's compounded, it's a lot more expensive than if it's what's called a simple COLA. So if you look at the green, or the blue, sorry, let's just say this person retires at age 60. This is a state employee. They retire at age 60, and let's say their pension is $50,000, and they live to be age 90. With a simple COLA, they'll be making $95,000. You see how that straight line goes up every year? 3%. But if you have a compounded COLA, and you live longer, as people are, look at the difference. See how that thing starts to spike, the red line? The difference there is $250,000. More. And that was a benefit that we put in the law before we realized how underfunded we were, perhaps, about 22 years ago, and it's unsustainable. That's the part, if we can get people to give up that compounded COLA, make it a simple COLA, maybe freeze the COLA if you retire early for a few years until you're 67, then we can afford this, and we can make this, we can stabilize the pension system. And that's what the proposal is. And by the way, we did vote in the Illinois State Senate for a plan that would do this for the state employees and for the General Assembly, and it passed the Senate. And to highlight my point about the need for it to be bipartisan, it received 30 votes, which is what you need to pass a law in the Senate. It got 16 Democrats and 14 Republicans. And it went over to the House. It passed the Senate. They didn't call it. It was done on the last day. But it's a good template for what we need to do when we finally get a pension deal. Okay? So what we would propose, and this would be constitutional, is we would say to all the employees, teachers, state employees, here's the deal. If you reduce your benefits, your contractually, your compounded COLA, take a simple COLA, have it be frozen until you for 5 years or until you get to age 67, then we will guarantee you two things. You can keep your health insurance, which we're providing, And all your pay raises, this would be for like a young teacher, all your pay raises that you get to you're only 28, all your pay raises you get to your 62, you'll get to include that in your calculation of your final pension. Okay? But if you don't take the deal, if you want to keep that compounded COLA, guess what? That's option 2. You lose your health care, and all your pay raises won't be considered part of your pension. What's interesting, to me anyway, I found that all the state employees and teachers, 2/3 of them are there for less than 13 years. So we have a lot of young people. If you talk to them, if you talk to young people here, they probably say, I'm not even going to have Social Security when I get older, because they don't think about pensions, right? You get older, you start thinking about pensions. So if we can pass this law for all these 5 systems, we can save between $66 and $88 billion over the next 30 years. So over the next 30 years, if we don't change the law, we have to pay $309 billion into these funds. But if we pass this law, get folks to voluntarily take one of those 2 options, we can save between 66 and 88. The reason why there's a range is because it depends on how many people sign up and how many don't. Okay, there's one other component of the pension reform which is very controversial, especially out here in Elmhurst, Illinois. Okay? So I'm coming right into Elmhurst, Illinois to tell you about it. And I wasn't subpoenaed to be here. I voluntarily came here. All right? Lightly. All right, here's the deal. The teacher's retirement system, the one that doesn't cover Chicago. Most states, and in Chicago, the local school district pays for the pensions for the teachers. But in Illinois, for some reason, in the suburban and downstate school districts, the school district sends the bill to Springfield and says, we just negotiated a contract to hire a teacher, and the pension bill, we're going to send that to you. And that's why we're paying $2.5 billion this year into the pension system. So we said, I'll tell you what, how about if we start to slowly ask the school districts to have a little skin in the game. So when you negotiate those contracts, tell the teachers, hey, they passed the law in Springfield that says we got to start putting some money from our school district into your pension system. And we'll phase it in. We'll make it 0.5% of the payroll every year until it gets up to about 6%. So it'll be 12 years to phase this in. And for every dollar that they put in, that means we don't have to put it in at the state level, and we will therefore have more money to pay for the things that you now know we spend money on at the state budget. So this is what the second part of the pension reform is. The state would save $27 to $29 billion over that 30 years. Because not only would we ask the local school districts to do it, we would also ask the universities to do it. So guess what? The state pays for the pensions for the universities and the community colleges too. They don't contribute anything themselves. And we've had talks with representatives of the universities, representatives of the community colleges, and the school districts to try to talk them into this. I am very concerned about the fact that we don't want the local school districts to have to raise property taxes. I believe it's real clear that they would not have to do that. What's more likely to happen, because it's phased in, is that the teachers, when they sit down and do their negotiations, they're going to have to recognize that that school district had to put some money in to the pension system. There'll be a little less money available for their pay raises. And by the way, these statistics assume that these teachers in the suburban and downstate areas are going to get 7% pay raises every year for the next 30 years. That's what we're assuming. That's how much money we're putting away to account for that. That's pretty big. That's a lot bigger than the cost of living. So the teacher's retirement system would save us $20 billion. The universities and the community colleges would be $8, and that would alleviate the pressures on the state budget. So what we've done here is to cover how the state budget works, where we spend our money. I told you what we did with Medicaid and how these pensions are so important, and a little bit about the proposals for how we can reform it. Hopefully we can do this, again, in a bipartisan way, because otherwise it won't work. And we look forward to trying to do this in the veto session or the first part of the year, because if we don't do it soon, we're going to really have a real crisis. I want to thank you very much for inviting me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I want to thank President Cullerton very much for coming to spend some time with us today in such an informative session. I served with President Cullerton in the House and found him to be a very conscientious and concerned legislator doing an outstanding job. I think those of us in Illinois are fortunate to have his caliber in the General Assembly and his leadership. So with that, we have two people that will be available to ask questions. One over here. Is that you, Heather? Heather, raise your hand, and Heather has a microphone. You can go to Heather, or you can go over to Peggy and a microphone, and please identify yourself and ask the question with them, and they have the microphone for you. So please go to the side. Thank you. Gentlemen, if you'd get up and go to the side right there. And there's one over here on this side as well.
They're all on the right.
They're all on the right.
Hello, my name is Joseph, and I'm a student here in Urban Studies. And my question is just with your pie charts and graphs, because you went through that and I didn't have the whole breakdown.
You want to go back? Yeah, we'll go back.
Is that just available on that Illinois Senate website?
Yes, many of these are on the website already. This order in which we put them will be put on in the next few days.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you. Illinois Senate Democrats is the
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Mario Vescovi, and I live in Oak Brook. I have a question for President Cullerton. I do believe in pensions, and I know there's a constitutional law that states that we have to pay the pensions to the public employees. But my question to you is, why don't we go on the same playing field? The majority of the people in the state and country receive Social Security. There's no reason why we can't implement that program for the teachers, the firemen, and the police, and then just change the playing field back to being paid the same. Now, my question, next question is, what percentage of our tax dollars goes into the pension fund to support the teachers and the firemen and the police? Just curious.
Well, it's 15% of the total general revenue fund budget.
So 50% of our tax dollars, and the rest is derived from what, other sources for the pensions?
Well, the pension system has contributions from the employees,
yes,
contributions from the employer, and investments.
Okay. But I'm going back to another question. Why can't we just change that playing field and state the fact that pay into FICA, the money, the additional money you make as income, invest in some other retirement plan? Why can't we do that? It eliminates additional costs of the tax dollar to supplement it. I do believe in the pension system, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying eliminate that, but change the playing field to the rest of us who are getting Social Security. That's all I'm asking.
Yeah. If I understand your question, any change to the system has to be done by agreement because of the Constitution. So you'd have to set up an option where you ask people to give up something, work longer, contribute more money, whatever it is. If it's a change to what the deal that they have now, you can propose that, but then they have to do it voluntarily. So in order to induce them to do it voluntarily, you have to have some other component of it, like basically taking away their health care or taking away their pay raises. That's what we devised. But you can do any different combination, and we're very open to any combinations. But you have to remember, if we pass something that's unconstitutional, it'll take 2 years. 2 years later, we'll find out from the Supreme Court that it didn't work, and we would have wasted 2 years of reforms. So that's why we want to make sure we do it in a constitutional way.
I understand that. So I'm saying I hopefully consider that possibility. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And we're going to go over here, Dr. Mixon.
Hi, I'm Connie Mixon. I'm a professor of political science and director of our urban studies program here. Elmhurst, or Illinois, has over 7,000 units of local government, more than any other in the nation. Consolidating some of these governments would result in significant cost savings. What role can the state play in encouraging more consolidation and more metropolitan regional planning?
We are actually in charge of that, but as you can tell from my budget, we don't actually save the money that would result from those consolidations. That would be the local taxpayers, okay? Not that we're not for it. Especially people from Chicago, because we have one school district. Okay, the problems, and we don't have any township government. So it's townships and school districts, okay? And believe me, I've tried. I actually had a bill last year to consolidate townships. Even, it's so complicated, it's amazing. And the politics of primarily, you know, suburban and downstate politics. In the case of townships, it should be a little easier because townships have money. they have some money. They have a tax levy, they have some assets. In the case of school districts, it's more complicated because school districts have money, but they also have debt. So if you want to consolidate a school district, somebody's in a school district that doesn't have any debt, and now you're telling me, no, I'm consolidated with one that does. That's not fair. And that's where there's been so much problem. The one way that the state can help is something that this college, for example, has benefited from, and that is a jobs program that we passed 4 years ago, a capital bill, which is working its way. It's benefited in all the roads that have been improved the last couple of years, and now even money that literally came to this college. When we build new schools, if you have a school district that has two schools that have been there for 100 years, with the alumni that graduated from that school, but they're both half empty, and you want to pick which school you're going to consolidate, if you were able to build a new school in between those two, close both of those down, that would be an easier way to consolidate that school district. So it's tricky, but I think you could incentivize school consolidation through that capital bill. That would be one way of doing it. The other way is just simply to go and tell the townships, you're slowly going to be phased out. The county's going to take over your role, and it's just a tough bill to pass. A lot of the legislators used to be in township government, you know. And again, for the people from Chicago, absolutely no problem to vote for it. It's suburban and downstate guys that are against it. Okay.
Hi, my name is Richard Thomas. I'm a senior in history and political science major here. My first question...
Are you on the basketball team?
No, I used to be.
Yeah, it looks like.
My first question is, like a lot of the local governments are kind of going broke because of stuff that's being started at the state level and it's going to be pushed down to them. My question is, like, how does, like, what's being stopped? Like, what are you guys doing to prevent?
Yeah, you're talking about mandates. You're talking about mandates. It's where we pass a law mandating that a local government provide some service and we don't provide the money. The flip side of that is what I showed you in the other state funds. We collect an income tax and we give them, I think it's 10% of the first 3% of our income tax. So we give them over $1 billion, which is totally discretionary. We could pass that law and change it and they could get nothing. So it's kind of like a balance there, okay? We are, especially in these tough times where people really want to have government be efficient, we are always open to having suggestions, and people can put legislation in to cut down on mandates. Some of them involve unions, okay? School districts, we've passed laws to kind of benefit unions in their effort to get prevailing wages, to get paid more money, quite frankly, than some people could otherwise contract for. And those are very legitimate issues, school districts particularly. And so I think that those type of mandate obligations will be on the table when we discuss how to get enough votes for these other reforms. So it's a very good point. I agree with it.
Thank you very much. Elaine Sanis, Village Trustee of Oak Brook, DuPage County Board, District 2 candidate. A couple of things. One is the chart on COLA, compounded COLA, and the effects of it over the past 30 years.
It's about, I think we passed it in about the COLA compoundedness of the compounded COLA was passed somewhere around 98, 2000.
Okay.
So it's been a couple decades of that.
So I think that the difference is about 30%.
Yeah.
The blue line versus the red line.
Yeah.
Okay, so we know that our pension system has been negatively impacted by way more than 30%. So we know that even changing this from compounded COLA to simple COLA is not going to fix the problem.
Well, it's going to save exactly the amount of money that I told you. It's saving 66 to 88 billion just by passing the proposal out of 309 billion. So whatever percentage that is, that's what the numbers show.
I'm not implying. What I'm implying is that that's not going to save the system. It's going to help. It'll save that money, but the pension plans will still be in a bad state.
Well,
I think also that moving it off to the local taxing bodies That's okay too, and that's a step in the right direction, just like the simple COLA versus compounded COLA. Those are steps in the right direction. But that also isn't going to change. And it's not pension reform that the citizens are so much concerned about. So much of it is about pension abuse. It's that, you know, recipient of $426,000 a year is the highest paid pensioner. Moving it off to the local level is not going to prevent that.
At the end of the 30 years, the pensions are 100% funded. Actuarially, it's expected if we don't make any changes, we have to pay $309 billion into these 5 systems in the next 30 years. With the compounded COLA proposal, that alone would save, depending upon how many people take the deal, between 66 and 88 billion. The remainder is going to be paid over that 30 years. If we do the cost shift, as it's referred to, where the local school districts, just like Chicago and 36 other states, have some skin in the game, that adds 28 billion that we don't have to pay. At the end of the day, though, we get to the 100% funded. So it does solve the problem. The other thing that you mentioned is the abuses in the system. Those are the things that get the headlines, and there's no question that they have happened. And you know what? The fact that they're publicized is a good thing because it helps us get political support for the reforms. However, those abuses, as wrong as they were, and they're corrected in this bill, it's not where the money is. The money is in this compounded COLA. So we end those abuses where people other than state employees got to get into a pension fund, people from union, people that work one day and then they got these big pensions, people in school districts that get big pay raises their last day and then all of a sudden their pension, you know, it's not just teachers, it's administrators here too. So I agree with you that those are horrible things. We correct those, but it should be noted that this proposal will have the effect of stabilizing our payments from the general revenue fund into the pension system at about the 15% level that they are now. If we don't make these changes, it'll skyrocket and it'll just, there won't be enough money to pay for basic services. But this is a solution. It's a tough solution. Who's against it? The unions, the teachers' unions, the state employee unions. We're taking them on. We're saying, guys, we're doing this for your benefit, and you got to help us. So far, they're not supportive. But it does solve the problem at the end of the day. Okay, so I apologize for not explaining myself properly. First of all, what we're talking about is having the local school districts pay money into the pension system, not into the state general revenue fund. It'll go directly into the pension system. And keep in mind, and I made this point earlier, that right now the state's paying for all of that, okay? And in Chicago, we get nothing, all right? So that's obviously not fair, and it's one of the things this does is it makes it fair. Everybody in the state is, all the school districts are paying into the pension system. We want to phase it in. Okay? It hasn't been the law that require them. We would change the law to require the local school districts to slowly put in 0.5% of the payroll each year until it's about 6%. So it would take 12 years. The money would go into the pension system. Now, the fear that you could legitimately raise is not that we would take that money out of there and spend it on something else. The fear that you could raise legitimately is that we would increase the benefits for those local school districts so that they'd have to put more money in. So we control the benefits, the local school districts would have to do what we told them, okay? And so that's a legitimate concern. And that's why we passed a constitutional amendment this year, which is on the ballot, which you should vote for, which says in order to increase benefits, it requires an extraordinary vote before you could ever do that. And so that's kind of a reassurance to the local school districts that we are going to take your money, we're going to put it in the pension system, we're going to invest it, and going forward, if you want to keep on giving out 7% pay raises, you know, it's going to cost you more. If you give out a little bit less than 7% pay raises, it'll cost you less. So that actually is within their control. Now, maybe I'm not answering your question.
Local districts are going to pay in that part.
Yeah.
Theoretically, then the state is going to be laying in paying in less.
The same amount of money, yes.
Where's the guarantee then to taxpayers that that is going to reduce state spending, or that money is going to go to paying off the pension?
Because the state is assuming the responsibility of all the past debt. So we are still going to pay in 15% of our budget into all of these systems. We're assuming the obligation for the past debt. We're saying, going forward, the local school districts have to start having a little skin in the game and pay a little bit each year. That money is going to go into the pension system, and for that $20 billion that over the next 30 years they pay in, that'll be less money. So it'll be in the state budget. You'll see from our pie charts where we spend the money. We're not hiding it. I mean, it goes to Medicaid, it goes to higher ed, it goes to, you know, elementary and secondary, human services, for the Haymarket. I mean, those percentages are about the same every year. But what's squeezing them, as I tried to point out, is the fact that these pension costs are going up. Those pension costs would not go up. A part of it would be reduced because we're reducing the benefits, and part of it would be reduced because we're getting some money from the local school districts. Okay.
Last question.
Hi, my name is Kathy Gilroy from Villa Park, and I attended the discussion last night by Professor Simpson, where on corruption he mentioned gambling was one of the main causes of corruption. And yet it seems that at the end of every session, it's the last few hours of the last day of the session, the legislature passes a bill to expand gambling. And when there are more important things to discuss, it's been found that the revenues from casinos, 50% are from people with problems with gambling. And now you talk about this capital bill, a big percentage of that is supposedly going to be funded by the video gambling that's being rolled out right now. I would like to ask that the legislature refrain from expanding any more gambling. That is not the answer to our problems in Illinois. I work in the senior market, and just this morning I received a call from the son of one of my clients. She had been in a nursing home on Medicaid and passed away. She had over $100,000 with me, which she used to pay until she ran out of money. And then last Christmas, she had to move to another nursing home because the one she was in only had 8 beds for Medicaid, and they were full. But if she had given that money to her son, there's a 5-year look back. They can't qualify for Medicaid if they've given funds to family within the previous 5 years, or at least they have to provide that same amount before they can qualify for Medicaid. And yet the casinos bus the seniors in because they know that they have that money. They can give that money to the casino and qualify immediately for Medicaid. So my contention is that basically the casinos are draining our budget for Medicaid. I think someone needs to look into that. And I really appreciate the fact that you're here because, you know, this area is so far from Springfield. It's nice that we can talk to our legislators right here. Well,
the people in Chicago don't know what's going on in Springfield, too, so I'd be happy to go anywhere I can. Downstate, they know what Springfield's doing. I take it that, was it Dick Simpson, was he here last night? Yeah, he's a former Chicago alderman, and there's been a lot of corruption in the Chicago City Council, so he would be an expert in telling you about corruption. You raised a couple of points on gaming. I have really, really mixed emotions in responding to you because I agree with what you're saying, but there's some other considerations. So let's start with the video gaming, okay? And this is kind of a sensitive point with me. When we were putting together this capital bill that I was bragging about because it creates all these jobs, we had to figure out a way to pay for it. And the way we decided to pay for it was with increase in vehicle sticker fees and transfer fees. We increased the sales tax on candy and beauty aids. We increased the liquor tax on on liquor, and we even decided to expand the lottery so that the lottery tickets could be bought online by wealthier people rather than poorer people, which is actually something which hasn't been implemented yet, but I think you'll find only for the big games where there's really high stakes, the average person would only spend $5. Okay, so it's not aimed at having somebody lose their house over the lottery. So that's something which we put in. And then, since half the money was going to roads, we talked about, quite frankly, my idea, as well as the speaker, raising the gas tax by 5 cents. Okay? And this was 4 years ago. So the gas was $2. Now it's $4.50. And we said we wanted to do 5 cents. The Republican leaders said, and the governor said, no, we're not going to do a gas tax. And instead, they came up, that is, the Republican leaders came up with this idea of doing video gaming. It was not my first choice. It was sold to us by saying they're doing it now in central and southern Illinois at VFW halls. They got these video gaming machines, and they say for amusement only. And people are really gambling, and the state doesn't get any of the money. So we reluctantly went along with it. And then, as it turns out, people could opt out. A number of people have opted out. The state gaming board took a long time to implement it. Hasn't even started yet. And that's the background. I wish that it wasn't there. I would have said a nickel for gas. Nobody would have known that we had passed it, as the price has gone up by so much. And that would have been a better way, a user fee, to pay for the roads. With regard to future gambling expansion, I personally don't gamble. I don't like it. The few times I've been in a casino walking through to go to a conference, I don't find anybody in there that needs to be in there. It's really depressing, and I agree with you. And the Rivers Casino in Des Plaines did $42 million a couple of months ago. At the same time, we have a geography problem, and that is, do you have gambling in Chicago? Yes, we do. It's called Hammond, Indiana. And 2/3 of the license plates over there are from Illinois, and they're going there and they're spending their money in Indiana and in Wisconsin. And so we're left with this dilemma of keeping the people who are already spending money in the state, and quite frankly, when foreign tourists come here, especially to Chicago, they want to know where the gaming is. Some of them now are going to the Rivers Casino, but still a tremendous number of going to Iowa, to Missouri, to Wisconsin, and to Indiana. So we haven't passed it yet. We have voted on it. I have reluctantly supported it because, once again, there's pressures to build infrastructure. There's pressures to cut to stop these cuts in education. And so that's where you have the debate. I don't know what's going to happen. Again, so I agree with you about how it's appealing to the poor people who don't need to be doing it, but at the same time, apparently a good number of those folks are spending their money anyway in a different state. Not what you want to hear, but I can see that from your face, but at least that's an honest answer. Okay.
Let us thank the President for his time and attention and his candor. Yeah. Mr. President, on behalf of President Ray and Elmhurst College, we want to present this with a little memento of your visit here, and we want to thank you very much for your time and attention and your candor and your ability to be here. Let me also tell you your colleague, Senator Dillard, is here, former Representative Biggins, and of course our great Mayor, Pete DeCiani, is with us today. Listen to your comment. And of course, all of you, the community and our students, are most important to us. We thank you all for coming today. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.